The Blue Jewel.
Chapter 8. Completed. It happened at the end of the age of the damned. The mags of Tripulia, blinded by their pride, they did not see how evil corrupted little by little inside. The magic of death reigned supreme in a place where it was forbidden by the gods. Necromancy. Adomeus Umher, the White. The weather in Tripulia changed suddenly. Rain appeared to clear the atmosphere. The mercenaries immediately decided that they should honor Nilam's remains properly, and they assumed all the costs of the funeral rites. The Temple of Thani was one of the most notable buildings in the city. Officially it was to worship the goddess and treat the city's deceased properly, but Kush knew that it was created out of fear of the goddess of death and to prevent the bodies of the city from being desecrated to be used in ancient dark arts. The cult of Thani was widespread during the Age of the Damned. She was the goddess who decided when mortals left this world, guided them to the gates of the afterlife, where the dead according to their past life would go to paradise or hell. Thani was not an affable goddess. She watched over the rest of the dead and persecuted those who did not respect her, such as the necromancers. In Caesarea the cult of Thani was not very respected. They usually buried their dead, although some made a small offering to the goddess. As soon as they went to the temple and once the donation had been delivered, the priestesses took care of the corpse by preparing it for cremation. Nilam was placed in a pile of cedar wood, and only one priestess in a black robe remained. He officiated the prayers that the goddess would guide Nilam's soul to its destination in the afterlife. Everyone observed the ritual in silence, for the mercenary's death was always present and a burial was a luxury. Many comrades lay abandoned to their fate without having a single prayer for their soul. Although in Almera when a mercenary did not return from a mission, a ceremony was held in the temple dedicated to the goddess and paid for by her company, it was an unwritten rule within the mercenaries of Almera. The priestess wore a golden mask. It was the face of the goddess, a copy of a mold that was made of the goddess in the early age when the gods lived on Shanaris with mortals. It was the first time he had observed a ritual of Thani. He had gone to the temples to ask for protection for the soul of his father or a companion who had died during his adventures, but it was the first time he had observed a ritual of cremation. That mask of the goddess of death was fascinating and very familiar to him. Arian, however, couldn't stop crying, as she was surrounded by Vanus and Kush, who didn't take death as naturally as his fellow warriors, who were more accustomed to dealing with loss. The fire burned brightly despite the rain. After 3 hours Nilam's body was completely reduced to ashes. The priestess took the ashes mixed with the rain in an urn and gave them to Arian, who now had to finish the rite. They went to another room in the temple, a large garden full of black petunias, the favorite flowers of the goddess. Right in the middle of the garden there was a kind of circular altar that had to be climbed by stairs. The priestess gave instructions as to what Arian was to do: go up to the altar and empty the contents of the urn onto the base. The goddess would do the rest. The young woman in solitude did as she had been ordered. Just at that moment it stopped raining in the courtyard. Arian left the mixture of ashes with rainwater and descended from the altar to stand with his friends. A miracle of sorts occurred. The ashes dried and a gentle breeze scattered them over the black petunia garden. The ashes began to glow like fireflies flying merrily on a summer night and gradually faded away. Everyone was amazed. Your brother's soul rests in paradise, the goddess has interceded for him. The priestess bowed to the young woman. The ritual was over. They gave another donation as a sign of gratitude, and left the temple. Quietly they returned to the inn. Those who were hungry dined, and then retired to sleep. Arian locked herself in her room without speaking to anyone and accompanied by the Kendali. Norak tried to sleep. But there were a lot of questions to be asked, and to his surprise that night he had a very real dream. He was in the underworld, in a land where the dead roamed until they reached their destination. The half-orc had never been there, but he knew it was Thani's domain. Instinctively he knew where he should go, to an endless field of black petunias. He walked through the flowers until he came to a very beautiful central garden. A fountain with several waterfalls greeted him, At the end of the garden was a throne where waiting for him was the goddess of death. The golden mask worn by her priestesses was a faithful copy of her face. In person he was a little more affable, Agnorok thought. Thani had a huge black crow resting on his hand, caressing the goddess's face with its beak. Both the Corvid and the Immortal looked at the half-orc. The goddess smiled at the sight of him, seemed to know him and got up. The raven flew towards Agnorok perching on his shoulder. The half-orc was bewildered. The crow began to stroke him with its beak in the same way it had done with the goddess. Thani reached the height of the half-orc. She was much taller than him, almost ahead of him. Agnorok was not afraid. The goddess showed no anger towards him. And when he reached his height, the goddess gave him a warm kiss on the forehead, made Agnorok remember his childhood and woke up. What the hell did that dream mean? It was still night and he couldn't sleep a wink again. To add insult to injury, the rain had increased in intensity. He went to the window and what he saw left him amazed. Right in front, perched on the roof of another inn, was the raven of Thani's dream. The raven bowed his head and flew away to disappear into the rain, to the dismay of the half-orc. Agnorok was disoriented. He decided to go down to the hall of the inn. He needed a glass, better two, maybe a whole bottle to try to assimilate this. The hall was empty except for Aris, who was sitting by the fire. Outside the rain continued to fall heavily. He took a seat next to him. The other half-orc handed him a bottle. Agnorok took a very long drink. A long night. Agnorok commented more to himself. Aris was watching the fire in silence. Agnorok joined him. The door of the inn opened and an old woman entered, totally soaked. The two half-orcs turned and did not give it any importance. Surely it was a tramp who with the storm sought shelter and found the door open. As soon as she woke up, the innkeeper would kick her out of the place unceremoniously. They had nothing to do. The old woman slowly approached the two of them. The situation was too surprising and strange. They both looked at each other and put themselves on guard, so they had checked in Tripulia everything was possible. "Good morning, gentlemen." Neither of them answered. The old woman's voice was harsh and deep, with a strange, very nasal accent. "They don't mind if I can dry a little by the fire." Agnorok gave way to him and placed himself behind Aris. "Thank you very much. At my age this rain is not good at all." The old woman took off the robe that covered her head to dry her little matted white hair. An empty eye and large wrinkles indicated her age. With the other eye she looked at the two half-orcs. "One can consider myself very lucky today. It is the most important day of my life." The two of them were shocked at the old woman's words. He took a deck of cards out of a sort of bag and showed it to her. Then he began to shuffle them with extraordinary skill. "My lords must pay attention to this." The old lady quickly turned and stood on the table next to her, the two half-orcs sitting in front of her. In Tripulia it was common to find all kinds of fortune-tellers who used multiple methods to predict the future, sell lucky charms and potions of dubious effectiveness. So they played along. The first card was the thief, the second card was death, the third was the black dragon, the fourth was the king of heaven, and the fifth is the palace of the gods, and the last card was a huge black raven. Neither of the two half-orcs understood anything. They were not aware of the card predictions. "What does it mean?" The old woman smiled, but did not answer. "What's wrong with both of you?" The two half-orcs turned their heads. It was Gosberg who was coming down stretching nonchalantly. Agnorok replied. "We were with this." The two stood up and drew their swords. The old lady was not there. "Ha ha ha ha. What a scare. You are both paler than usual. Such brave warriors now look like helpless fawns." Gosberg approached them jovially. As Agnorok looked under the table, there had to be some explanation for the disappearance. "I was here. An old lady threw the cards at us." "Seriously, there's no one here." Gosberg sat in the chair where the old woman stood. "We've both seen it." "An old woman?" "With the rain falling, stop drinking." Gosberg drank some of the contents of the bottle. It must have been a ghost. Aris knew that this old woman was real. She had smelled the dampness of the cold water and there were still her mud footprints when she entered. Ghosts don't get wet with water. There are a lot of Megans here, maybe she was one of them and she used some spell. They both decided to go upstairs to their rooms to get some rest, but before they disappeared, Gosbert gave them a serious warning. Don't forget the cards that have been shown to you today. The two half-orcs looked at each other, didn't understand anything, and disappeared. While the Denka stared at the fire with a serious character, to murmur a few words while smiling. The thief, death, the black dragon, the king, the palace of heaven, and the raven. 3 days had passed since Nilam's funeral, and in Tripulia it was grey again, like the previous two, but she didn't care. She could barely tell the difference between day and night. She spent the days after her brother's cremation locked in that room of the inn in total darkness. The Kendali was watching her from a corner. She was worried about Arian not wanting to eat. All her loved ones, her parents, Loaf, Nilam, had disappeared from her life. She was now alone and would never see them again. She tried to warn her brother of the danger that was lurking in front of her, and what did she do? To get angry because she had sold the jewel, now her brother was dead. She had let herself down, a mistake that would never be forgiven. The Kendali watched Arian decompose, sitting on the bed, with her brown hair covering her face like a ghost. Vanis couldn't take it anymore and left the room. As soon as he closed the door, he found Aris coming up from the ground floor. "How's she?" the half-orc asked softly as he raised his head. The Kendali approached Aris. "Bad, my lord, he hasn't eaten anything in 3 days. I think he wants to die and at this rate is going to succeed." "Neither Mr. Kush nor I change her mind." The half-orc was saddened by the Kendali's comments. "A pity. I want you to accompany us to the meeting with the Mage Council. In the end, after our threats, they have agreed to solve all our doubts on this matter." "My lord, in this state I doubt if I can accompany you." Aris smiled for a moment and walked into Arian's room to enter without knocking. Arian was still in the same position. Aris came in but she didn't raise her head. She wanted to die, so she could be reunited with her family. Surely Thani would be kind to her, not like this cruel world. "I want to be alone." Aris knelt in front of her but was silent. "What do you want? You're really going to give up now? Your brother deceived you when you had risked everything to help him." Arian raised his head, his eyes contained in rage. "What do you know what it means to lose a loved one? Even if he deceived me. He was my brother and he loved me." She cried inconsolably again. "Crying doesn't fix anything. Your brother is far from here. What do you know? You make your living by killing for gold, you shouldn't care anymore. My brother was just another bag of gold." Aris sat down next to Arian, who jumped to the end of the bed. "I was 14 years old. That age for men is still a child, for orcs it is already adulthood. I was raised as an orc. I was already married and my wife was pregnant. What was left of my father's tribe lived as best they could at the southern end of the barren plains. We lived far away from the elves, and talks to annex the Black Empire were well underway." Aris paused before continuing. "They came like a shadow at night. We don't know the reason. Maybe they found out about the future pact, but the causes for which they attacked us now don't matter. I wasn't at home. Together with my father we were hunting. A sacrifice had to be offered to Mother Earth for her first grandchild. When we returned, we found only the remains of the massacre. Very few were able to escape." Arian felt pity. No one knew anything about this. The Black General had a family when he was a child, at least for men. "What happened?" "You already know, the annexation to the Black Empire as a province. My father was always in favor. He said that the orcs alone, the only thing we had achieved in all this time was to fight each other and lose against the elves and the Black Empire. A coalition with the Empire would give us the necessary discipline to progress. After the attack he was one of the most important figures in reaching an agreement with the Emperor. The legions were formed, a war began against the elves who had attacked us until we exterminated them. The first time an elven kingdom fell, a total victory for the Black Empire. But as you can see, that didn't help either. I ended up banished, and for the moment the Emperor has not put a price on my head. I serve him more alive than dead, but even so I do not give up. You must always fight to the end. But who cares? I care. It's not the same to leave this world fighting until the end than letting yourself go. My father, wife, and son wouldn't care either. Arian fell silent. Let's find out why your brother died. Bye. The magicians wanted us to go to the exchange for a reason. I don't like to be the object of their plans. We will know the truth, or at least part of it. Vengeance, it was a reason to live as valid as any other. Nilam's death had at least served to prevent them from getting hold of the jewel. He had to protect it at all costs. It was what Loaf wanted. Why do you think magicians will tell us the truth? Aris showed him a little blue jewel that began to shine like never before. If they want this, they will have to collaborate. Ferdinand de Bizzi was hurrying through the magnificent building, which was the headquarters of the Council of the Magic Orders of the city of Tripulia, commonly known as the Council of Magi. It was the body that governed Tripulia and all the mags of the world. Belonging to the council was already an honor. Only the Grand Masters of each order of magic in the city, who now numbered 15, were worthy. The most important order was that of the White Robes, founder of today's Tripulia, but theirs, the Order of the Magi of Light, also had its influence. Ferdinand was its Grand Master, an honor, and also the one who presided over the Great Council. As head of Tripulia he had to face multiple challenges. In his opinion the number of Magins did not stop growing and the rumors of necromancy within Tripulia itself were already too many to deny the problem that officially did not exist. But most of the council thought otherwise. The Magins gave too much gold in taxes to restrict their number, and necromancy was just plain gossip. It was an honor to be the president of the council, but the power was very limited. Not like in their order where the number of Magins was controlled and they served the same order. Necromancy was totally controlled, but that discipline was impossible to apply to the rest of Tripulia. The reason, the White Robes, the influence of Fedorus Magnus his Grand Master over the other orders was such that in reality the one who ruled Tripulia was Fedorus. The Tunics did not admit Magins. If a student abandoned his studies within his order he could not exercise magic, but he did admit that the others had Magins, since in their superiority they considered the rest of the orders as practitioners of an inferior magic. The necromancy thing, not to mention the subject until 3 months ago. The fact of depending on the will of the White Robes was a circumstance that displeased Ferdinand who wanted to introduce changes within Tripulia. But this situation would not last long. Fedorus was already over 100 years old, some ill-intentioned rumors pointed to dark practices to extend his life, and his health was fragile. Lately he did not attend the meetings of the council, his death was near, without his influence. Ferdinand would have his hands free to carry out the reforms that Tripulia needed. The most powerful wizard after Fedorus was him, without a doubt. But there was also another problem. The mercenaries who had recovered the magic object and were recommended by Fedorus himself now refused to hand it over. Their conditions were simple. They wanted to know the reason why a white-robed mage and a black Magin were involved when at first no one had told them about such a sinister conspiracy. If the explanation was not to their liking, they would keep the object. The truth is that the first surprised was Ferdinand himself. The exchange ended with 3 dead, an unknown young man who was the one who had the object, the white robe and the Magin. He made inquiries about the young man and had indeed applied for admission to all the orders of magic, including his own, but all of them had rejected him except one, which he abandoned after 2 months. Now, he had a letter of recommendation from an old acquaintance of his Loaf. They were friends during their time as apprentices both within the Order of Eternal Light. But Loaf did something unusual. He left his order to enter the White Robes, something very strange and something even stranger. For more than 20 years there had been no news of him. Loaf was an incredibly talented mage. He could be a Grand Maester without problems, but he disappeared and now a pupil of his appears out of nowhere with the object and ends up dead. Ferdinand didn't know what to answer. It's all too strange. Only the White Robes knew the truth. This matter came to the attention of the council due to a confession of Phedoros himself. Inside the white robes there was a section of magicians who were looking for magical objects to use in black magic. Quite a scandal. Even if the news reached Albioners' ears, they could have many problems. What was that white robe doing? Why is this object so important? How far does corruption go within the most important order of Tripulia? What is its objective? It was something that Ferdinand couldn't answer to the mercenaries, and that's why he was so nervous. His strategy was a simple meeting. There was a signed contract and it had to be fulfilled, although in principle he had told them that those who would carry out the exchange were mercenaries from 3 to a quarter. That did not affect what was signed. Their complaints would reach Elmira if necessary. The object belonged to the council. The end. He arrived at the council's audience room, a beautiful circular room with 15 chairs that made a semicircle. In the central position his seat was a little higher than the rest. When he arrived he noticed that an old magician was sitting next to him. It was Phedoros, a notable surprise. This matter must be very important. He greeted him with a bow that Phedoros responded with a smile. The other members of the council arrived. At the request of Phedoros, only the members of the council remained in the room and the mercenaries entered. The subject to be discussed was confidential. There were the mercenaries before them. Ferdinand had reports of all of them. The company of the Blue Phoenix, one of the most solvent in Almera. It was fortunate that they were so close when they wanted to hire his services. The group is made up of Aris the Black General with his cousins, Kush a wizard of the unknown Thissy but quite remarkable and with all the permits in order, Krytus an exiled dwarf of the Brown Hills, a huge dinker who had a hard time entering the room because of his fearsome 3 meters. Another half-orc with vague reports, and Gosberg. There were so many rumors about this little Denker that he didn't know what to think. Unlike in their first meeting, they were accompanied by a Kendeli, something extraordinary, and a young woman quite impressed to be in front of such distinguished sorcerers. From what he had been informed, the young woman was the sister of Loaf's late student. Ferdinand had instinct and something told him that this girl had something special. Finally, the chairman of the board received one last note from his apprentice, which he read just before the door closed. The note was brief: news about the last half-orc, named Agnorak, who caused the death of the king of the vampires 8 years ago. It was certainly something impressive. The doors to the hall were closed. All the magicians, apprentices, and secretaries stayed outside. Now they were alone. For a moment they studied each other. Ferdinand, as he was accustomed to starting conversations, so he took the floor. Your mission was not as discreet as all of us would like. At least you have the object in your possession, do you? Aris as captain advanced towards the mags. Yes. The magicians smiled. Was what they expected to hear. The price paid for their services was certainly not cheap. Give it to us now. Aris smiled but didn't answer. Another mercenary went ahead of the group. It was Gosberg and stood next to Aris, who took a step back. It was clear who was in charge. We are not sure that we are going to comply with the conditions of our contract. The Magi did not like these words and began to murmur among themselves. Ferdinand had to restrain himself. He had enough problems since he also had to endure the requests of proud mercenaries. Mortals, how dare you before us mighty mags refuse to fulfill your contract? Phedoros had risen. The old man looked 50 years younger, his eyes bloodshot, and he leaned against a staff of white ivory. Everyone in the room was impressed except for a small Denker who approached the powerful magician and lit a cigarette. Almost everyone in this room is mortal. Phedoros smiled and sat down again. You will not get out of here alive. Gosberg took a long drag. Neither do you. To their surprise, the Denker and the magician began to laugh in a knowing way. Gosberg extinguished the cigarette with his boot. It would be a solution detrimental to the interests of all. Phedoros stopped smiling. I understand. I agree to answer all your questions in exchange for the object. The rest of the mags were amazed. They had never seen the great Phedoros Magnus retreat from anyone. He always dominated with an iron fist, but to Gosberg he had yielded. The president of the council was resigned to being a real troupe, and the rest of the magicians were too absorbed in the conversation since Phoedorus was thinking of saying information that was not found in any book. Kush stepped forward to the height of Gosberg, bowed to Phoedorus as the great magician that he was. The old man accepted it by quickly closing his eyes. Reverend masters of the council, I think it is necessary to expose some questions. What is the reason for us to be linked to such a strange case? In Tripulia, there is a group of mags who have murdered innocents for a dark purpose, isn't that true? All the magicians nodded their heads. Now, a friend of ours who comes from the continent of Tagir came in search of her brother who died in the exchange. The object in question is a small jewel, and his brother's assassins are a mage member of the Order of the Grand Phoedorus and a black magician who is dedicated to necromancy. The magician went north in search of the jewel, which implies a degree of corruption within the Order of the White Robes of great importance. Kush spoke with great authority. He looked like another Grand Master. It came as a surprise to the council, who despised all the mags in the south. We want to know what the hell is going on in this city. Gosberg demanded again. Kush again took the floor. Arian's brother studied in a magic order, and the council was never aware of it, nor were we informed of who he was. We found out thanks to his sister. 2 magicians travel north, and the council does not know this fact. They forced the king of Tame to look for our friend, a fact that the teachers surely do not know. The black magicians roam freely at night, murdering innocents within the walls of this city. It's time to tell the truth. Ferdinand had a surprised expression. It was true. It was all true. Tripulia was a nest of corrupt wizards and full of murderers who would sell corpses in exchange for a few gold coins. Ferdinand spoke not to answer these questions, but to regain the prominence lost throughout the meeting. It was time to show who was the president of the Council of Magi to all those present, including Phoedorus. Your questions are all reasonable, magician. But I regret that I cannot answer most of them, because the same questions that you are asking us are available to all the members of this council, and there is only one person in this room who can answer them. Ferdinand looked at Phoedorus, and the whole room listened to the Grand Master of the White Robes, who seemed to be amused by the whole situation. It seemed that this great quarrel had rejuvenated him. In this whole matter something does not add up. You're right, a faction of the White Robes corrupted by necromancy. Please, inside that tower no one farts without Phoedorus knowing. Gosberg said these words as he drained a glass of wine. If what they say is true, bringing Elaban's triumph is a risk. Kush commented while desperately looking for something in his book. Agnorok stood up. No, they have paid 5 chests full of coins without question. If we don't, they will look for other mercenaries. But they need a priest from Elaban. For a quarter of what all the mercenaries of Almera offer us, they would go hunting for Arian. Everyone was left thinking, the council wouldn't care what means were used, the mags only wanted the jewel, Arian for them was secondary. Surely another group of mercenaries hired by the council or by the corrupt mags could kidnap her to obtain the jewel. Then the best thing is that we are the ones looking for the jewel. Krytus commented to the half-orc. At least we will be in control of the situation. If we do not accept, we will not be able to protect our friend. Kush sentenced. Aras stared thoughtfully into the fire. There is a traitor in the council, but we must go for the jewel. Or more. Gosberg added, draining the last glass before going to sleep. The next morning Kush and Aras met with the mags to sign the new contract and send a copy to Almera. Arian was walking absent-mindedly around the inn. Agnorok was sitting next to the fireplace. The young woman took a seat next to him and greeted him. Good morning. Agnorok turned his head to smile slightly. What does it feel like to be a priestess of the god Elaban? Arian shrugged. I don't know, it's a surprise, I had only heard that name in stories. The half-orc turned around completely, and then ate a piece of dry bread. Perhaps for some it was not a surprise. What do you mean? It is a great coincidence that the only person who can collect the triumph of Elaban appears before the magicians when they intend to go and look for the jewel. True. We have been without priests of Elaban for an era, and you appeared just now. Arian was silent for a moment. Agnorok was right. What's the point of all this? But I didn't know what to say. This is the sign that a new era is about to begin. The half-orc reflected. Arian watched the half-orc, rough, with wounds, looking like he could kill anyone for 2 gold coins, but under that rough appearance there was an intelligence that was more dangerous than any sword. Agnorok was right, things were about to change forever. I'm scared, Agnorok. You have nothing to fear. If you are here, you have a destiny to fulfill. The days passed and the preparations for the trip to Turkheimak had the mercenaries very busy. The main problem was to know where the Temple of Elaban was located and the most direct route. They only had the daylight time, since if they stayed in the city at sunset it would be their eternal damnation according to legend. Fortunately, the library of the Council of Magi had a series of maps of the cursed city. With the help of Fedoras and his apprentice Arian, they were able to consult everything they needed. The most interested in the subject were Arian, Kush, Gosberg and Vanus. Aris just wanted a reliable map to take with him during the trip, but he consulted the maps to get a clear idea of what they needed to do. Agnorok didn't show much interest in truth. He believed that it had taken a long time for those maps to be reliable, and he trusted his instinct more once they arrived in the city. The dwarf and the rest would do what the others ordered them to do, so they stayed at the inn resting. The Council of Mags got them the best ship in all of Olbiana, a real gem from one of the best sailors in the world. It was not time to spare any expense, and the crew was accustomed to navigating the treacherous waters that. It was not a long journey. The cursed city was located south of Olbiana, abandoned to its fate for more than 5,000 years. It was the eve of the trip and everyone was very upset about going to the cursed city. Agnorok was somewhat restless, and as the hours did not pass he decided to visit the temple of Thani to make an offering. He was not especially religious, but after the dream after the cremation of Nilam he was obsessed. She needed answers, and it was the only place where her gut said she would find it. The half-orc found the temple empty. Strange, the usual thing is that there was always some service to perform. Semi-orc greetings. A sweet voice spoke to her. She was the priestess who had performed the funeral for Nilam. Greetings, priestess. She announced to me that you would come. The priestess smiled and took a seat on a stone throne, just as in her dream. Then the same raven that she had seen in the dream that same night alighted on the arm of the priestess. Don't be naive, Agnorok. You think my goddess wouldn't warn me that you'd come? The half-orc was puzzled. The priestess stroked the head of the raven, who closed his eyes gratefully. I've seen that crow before. They are Thani's servants. We raised them here. True, but this raven was not born in this temple. The priestess smiled again. Do you think it has come out of the underworld itself? In reality, it is an unimportant issue. The raven took flight and disappeared into the clouds. You are very practical. What do you want? Answers. I'm not the one who should give them to you, but she's given me a message for you. Agnorok fell silent. What the hell did the goddess of death want from him? The priestess smiled again. She was excited by the half-orc's presence. She knew something else, but it was evident that she would never tell him. You are under their half-orc protection. Whenever you need it, the temples of Thani will give you their help in whatever you want. Of course she did not expect to hear that. The priestess slowly approached Agnorok and whispered in his ear. It's time for you to accept your fate. Then the priestess stroked the half-orc's hair to disappear. Agnorok was left alone again. He was looking for answers, but now he had many more doubts. Why the hell was he under the protection of the goddess of death? A voice emerged inside the temple. You already know the answer. Arian watched from his window as the mercenaries loaded his belongings into the wagon. Now they left for Olbiana, the jewel of the south. In its port they would embark for Turkheimak. In less than a week they would arrive in the cursed city. The young woman is nervous, but not only because of that trip. There was the two of them carrying some sacks in the wagon, two mercenaries, the two half-orcs, and so different. Agnorok strong, confident, quiet. Agile, intelligent, brilliant. She was attracted to both of them, but deep down she only loved one of them. Although they were focused on their work, furtive glances escaped from both of them towards her. Sometimes she talked to Vanus about the subject, the doubts were less and less. Jumel played silently with his dagger. He was bored, although he was disciplined and loyal. Although he had decided to fulfill his mission with his usual efficiency, he longed to be in the service of his master in Arcio and to attend to his usual duties. At least now he had an incentive. Fedoras personally took care to find him a place where he could observe the meeting with the mercenaries totally unnoticed. Agnorok was there, that damned half-orc. He was like a rat, able to survive forever. He smiled angrily, his right hand touching the only scar on his face, the fruit of Agnorok. The main thing was the mission he had been ordered, but if he could also take revenge on that bastard, he would not hesitate for a moment. Jumel nailed angrily to the table, savored imagining that moment, and then smiled again. He was very close.